take your seats. The next session is about to begin.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to our next session, Brexit and Europe's security. May I introduce our esteemed panel, the Foreign Minister for Slovakia, Miroslav Lajčák, and Michel Barnier, the EU's chief negotiator for Brexit, who I'm sure will need no introduction. Welcome to you both. Can I just say, it is quite a relief, actually, to finally be in the company of Michel, because I seem to chase him around the Justice Lipsus building in Brussels at every summit, and here he is trapped on a stage with me for the next 45 minutes. So I am the happiest TV anchor in Europe. He's suddenly gone pale, but I will be kind. I promise we will be kind. So we are talking about Brexit in the context of European security. I'm going to try and get to as many questions as I can over the course of the next session. So this is your time to put all those Brexit questions to our panel. God help us, we're all Brexit experts now, aren't we? And also I should remind you that you can take part if you're not in the room and you're outside the conference. Remember, you can go to slido.com. This is our website. You can ask questions, put in the hashtag GlobeSec2019, and we are in the Danube space, don't forget. So send your questions. The more you vote for the questions, the higher they go up the list. So I'm going to kick us off. I've just come from Portsmouth, Foreign Minister, and there were 16 countries there for an event which was very humbling, very moving for the D-Day commemorations. But they signed a commitment to work together to get through international tensions on the world stage. And I thought it was revealing that they even felt they needed to sign such a document. Does that tell us that in the context of Brexit and in the context of Donald Trump, the institutions that we have post the Second World War are now under real pressure?
Yes, they are. It is widely recognized. Multilateralism is under pressure, is eroding, because somehow we see that you can violate the rules, written and unwritten, and get away without any consequences. So, and this is inspiring many others. So I'm glad that the 16 leaders agreed to work together, and I wish this will become a reality. I'm slightly skeptical, but the good intention is already a first step in the right direction.
Michel, we're going to talk about security, but the giant elephant that's sitting with us on the stage is the vacuum that currently exists in London. And as we speak, the Prime Minister is standing down. She is standing down in her capacity as the leader of the Conservative Party. Are you sorry to see her go, particularly in mind of who might follow her through the door of number 10?
Good afternoon to all of you, and first of all, let me thank the Global Sec team for inviting me on the side of the very active Minister of Foreign Affairs of this country, and you too, Seema, for being there. Yes, we are in a time of political change in UK. It's also time for me to pay tribute to Theresa May, to her determination, and if I may say, because it's exactly what I think, her political courage. Trying every day, every week, every month to deliver an orderly Brexit. And it is exactly for what I worked also with my team and the name of the European Union. So now we have to wait. Who will be the future Prime Minister of UK? We are ready to engage with him and with his team. We are ready to work once again for an orderly Brexit, which is from the very day one my goal, and much better for everybody. We are ready to respect the wish of the people of the UK.
Do you get on with Boris Johnson?
We are ready to respect the wish and the will expressed by the UK government, even if we regret the Brexit. To be frank, Christian, nobody has been able until now to give me any proof for the added value of the Brexit. Nobody, even Mr. Farage. No?
Just on that point.
I met Mr. Farage
Yes.
Once in my office at his request. It was a very stimulating meeting. You know? At the end of this meeting, I asked a question to Mr. Farage. Now we are going to deliver the Brexit. It is you ran for the Brexit. You won the Brexit. Okay. Can you tell me, Mr. Farage, what is your vision for the future relation between UK and EU? I was not alone in this meeting, so I can repeat what was his answer. And his answer was very clear and immediate about the future relation between UK and EU. His answer, which is very important for all of us, was, Mr. Barnier, after the Brexit, the EU will no longer exist. So that is the point.
Would you agree that Brexit does pose an existential threat to the European Union, Minister?
No, not now, not for the time being. On the contrary, as of now and as up until now, Brexit has been a great demonstration of European unity. And I mean, we are all impressed by that. And what's really important that we stay united until the very end of the process, and the process should not drag on indefinitely. That's very important. I mean, if we are unable to manage the Brexit, then we are probably not able to manage other things as well. But we are managing it very well, and also thanks to the excellent leadership coming from Michel Barnier.
You said last, I think, probably in the spring, just before the March deadline, that you were prepared to consider an extension so long as there was a purpose. Do you think attitudes are hardening in Europe to an extension beyond October the 31st?
I wouldn't say hardening, but we are already asking ourselves, what's the purpose of yet another extension? This 31st of October is already interfering with our European political calendar. You have UK, which is halfway in, I mean, de facto, economically, socially, halfway out, politically and mentally. You have the MEPs who are sitting in the parliament, are allowed to speak, but are not allowed to vote. This is already a very strange arrangement. And so it would be much better if solution one way or another was found before the European election. So if there is a request for another extension, just for the sake of repetition of the same, this might spoil the mood in many European countries. And, you know, I remember very well times when Czechs and Slovaks, still being part of the same country, were discussing the future arrangement. And it took us like 2 years. It was all friendly, but people got fed up. And then the public opinion was no longer willing to listen yet another story, yet another explanation, yet another failed meeting. And we ended up, I mean, splitting in a most amicable way. But I would not underestimate the public sentiment when it comes to this process. So if there has to be another extension, it has to be with a very good reason, like elections, the second referendum, definitely not because someone has given promise to reopen the withdrawal agreement, because we have said many times, and we will say many times, that this is closed, it's not going to be reopened.
Mr. Barnier, is there a point where no solution, the cost of no solution, outweighs the cost of no deal?
What do you mean by no solution?
Well, if there is no political solution in the UK Parliament to the withdrawal agreement that is before them, and they continue to push the problem down the road, is there a point for Europe where the cost of that outweighs the cost of no deal, which would be damaging to both sides?
The point is to know if the UK still wants to live in an orderly manner. This is the point, and we are waiting for the answer for the last 6 months. November. In November, we reached an agreement with Theresa May, with the British government, not against her, not without her, with the government. And let me just pay tribute and thanks the high professionalism of the civil servants of the UK in the negotiating team of the UK.
Ollie Robbins.
Ollie Robbins and many other people. I've been always impressed by the competence and the high professionalism of all these people. And I want to tell you, we are still waiting for this answer. And if the answer is yes, we still want to live in an orderly manner. The UK, the EU, the treaty, the withdrawal agreement is the only one possible.
I want to come to
the two other options, which are in the hand of the UK, are the first one, orderly withdrawal deal, are a no deal. It will be the choice of the UK, not our choice, never, or no Brexit.
I do want to come to the questions from the audience in a second. I just want to ask you one question, because the problem, of course, is the backstop. And our Europe editor at the BBC, Katja Adler, said today there's a concern that it seems like some monolithic slab of marble, the backstop, that it exists and you can't get past it and you can't get through it. Is there a summer negotiation where you could have a list of priorities? I prefer to call it like an onion, and you peel away skin by skin, and slowly but surely you demolish the backstop. So you don't have a time limit on the backstop, but slowly you get rid of it. Is that a possible solution to the stalemate?
Christian, I suppose you have a personal house or apartment, no?
Yes.
Have you an insurance for this house?
I do have insurance.
Have you?
Last time I checked.
Yes. Have you a time-limited insurance?
Yes. Oh, well, I appreciate the point you're making. You're saying you don't have a time limit on your insurance policy.
Imagine an insurance with a time limited. It is a point. Frankly speaking, I never worked for the last 3 years with any kind of aggressivity, as you know, spirit of revenge or punishment. Never, never. Because I have a huge and definitive respect and admiration for the UK, for many of the leaders in the past. Winston Churchill is the first one for me, and I never forget the solidarity of the UK people with my country and with the other countries of Europe. Never. So I regret this vote, and I try to work every day on an objective manner and base. No passion, no emotion, the fact, the figures, and only that. So what I tried to do in Ireland, and it was my very first point at the very beginning of my mission, to identify the place, the people, the sector where the Brexit creates uncertainty. And ladies and gentlemen, the place where you can see how the Brexit can create uncertainty and risks is Ireland, first of all. And if you look at my first declarations at the very beginning in 2016, we have identified with my team, the name of the European Union, this problem created by the Brexit, and only by the Brexit in Ireland. What put in risk the Good Friday Agreement, the stability, the peace, is the Brexit. So we have a common commitment with Theresa May and the British government to protect the Good Friday Agreement in all its dimensions. And for us, according with the Irish government, to protect the single market. And it's not about dogmatism or ideology, it's very practical reasons. And just let me use one example. You know that I have been also the French Minister for Agriculture and Fisheries. Any live animal entering in Northern Ireland, coming from Great Britain, the same country, two parts of the same country, if we have no border, no control, will entering immediately in the Slovakian, the Polish, the French, or the German market. Immediately, automatically. We must control. There is no way to escape of this obligation of control. And I can say the same for the control of food security, vegetables, the fiscal controls, and the controls for the food and for the products and the goods to protect the businesses of the single market. So what we try to do is to find, and we have found, together with the Brits, operational solutions to face the problem created by the Brexit. And what we have said in this treaty is we are ready to work in the framework of the future relation and to find a solution to avoid the border. If we don't find a solution in the framework of the future relation, we are ready together to work with the UK on a specific solution, what we call alternative arrangements. We need time. We are not sure to succeed. And until and unless we find this solution, the UK, as it requests, will be part, the totality of the UK will be part of our custom territory. That is the point. This is a backstop, as an insurance, until and unless. We are not really, I'm not willing to use a backstop. You are not willing to use your insurance for your house. But we need this insurance.
But in the context of what we're talking about, security, there is no greater security threat on the island of Ireland than that border and putting something on that border. And you said in a magazine, I think an interview just the other week, that protection of the single market is important, but only second to peace and stability. Is that a tacit acknowledgement on your part that in the event of no deal, there would be no border? And if so, how do you protect the single market if you don't put up a border in Ireland? Because the UK government are not going to put troops or border guards there, and I dare say the Irish government wouldn't do it either. So how are you going to protect the single market in the event of no deal?
But we are working with the Irish authority, and we are preparing contingency measures. In that case, I do not wish and I do not want this option to be created, but we are ready to face this situation in any case.
Okay. Would that be checks at Dublin, at Irish ports, rather than at the border?
I will not want to elaborate today, but we are ready. We are ready to implement contingency measures and to support the Irish government in that case. But let me say just one point. The problem is there, created by the Brexit, nothing else. We have to protect the peace. The stability is not a question of goods or customs. It's a question about people in Ireland, on both sides. And in any case, a new prime minister will not change the problem. The problem is there, and the new prime minister will have the responsibility with us to solve this problem and to protect not only the Good Friday Agreement in all its dimensions, but also to protect the national market of the UK and for us to protect our single market.
Okay, I want to get some questions from our audience.
If I may have sentence on
yes, please do.
On what Michel just said. Yes, I think there are unrealistically high expectations from the new leader of the Conservative Party in the UK, as if it is a game changer, which is not what I think, because the new leader will inherit the same divided country, the same parliament that has rejected all the possible deals so far, and will inherit the same arrangement. That means the withdrawal agreement and the declaration of future relations. And some of them are already promising that they will force the European Union to reopen the withdrawal agreement. It will not happen. So,
but do you think there would be a summer window where something could be added to it in the form of a legal protocol, maybe an understanding? Because that is what all the leadership contenders are talking about, adding something to it.
Well, if there was something like that, it would probably have been already proposed or discussed. So again, don't expect that there will be a miraculous solution out of the blue.
Yeah.
There could be obviously, agreement on different parameters of the deal, like the UK wants to be part of the common market or the customs area or whatever, but this is not likely to happen anytime soon. So therefore, I would just caution against too high expectations from the arrival of the new leader.
Yes, and I suppose Mrs. May...
If I may add just what is at stake in Ireland is first, the people and the peace and the stability, first. Second, the integrity of the single market, which is our main asset. And nobody can ask us to fragilize or to unravel the single market. Never, never, never. And the British people and the British government know what I'm speaking about, because we have built the single market with the UK during the last 45 years, with a high degree of influence of the UK for the single market. The UK knows the rules, knows the standards, knows the norms, knows the role of the Court of Justice, knows the role of the regulation and the supervision body. We are not ready to compromise, to fragilize, to bargain on the single market.
Okay. Let me get the microphones around the room. Do keep your questions short and concise if you can, then we can get as many in as we can. Yes, up at the back, please.
Thank you. Tom Nuttall from The Economist magazine. Mr. Barnier, I just wanted to, in a way, take the comments that Minister Lajčák just made and put them to you, that we have a Conservative Party contest at the moment. A lot of the candidates in that contest are making promises to MPs in the Conservative Party and members of the Conservative Party who will choose the next leader that say, we are going to go back to Brussels and renegotiate the withdrawal agreement. You said earlier the withdrawal agreement we have is the only one available. So I wondered if you wanted to take this opportunity to comment on some of the promises that are being made by some of these candidates. Thank you.
Certainly not. No, I always follow the same lines. I'm not ready to intervene, to express myself, so to give personal opinion on the domestic and internal policy of UK, and in particular the domestic or internal policy of the Conservative Party. I have to wait for the new Prime Minister. We are ready to engage with him and his team. And what is open, to be clear, and to everybody to be informed, what is on the table are two documents. The biggest one is the treaty on the Brexit, on the divorce, 600 pages. Good reading for the next weekend. Huh?
I've read it.
But on the side of these 600 pages of the treaty agreed with the UK government, we have another document agreed with the UK government about the future relationship. And this document is open to be improved and to be changed on a certain point in the respect of the UK red lines and the respect of our principles. And ladies and gentlemen, once again, we regret the Brexit for many reasons. We are going to deliver the Brexit if the UK still wants to leave in an orderly manner. What is much more important, in my view, is the future relation with the UK. Because in any case, the UK will remain a strong partner, an ally for the European security, and a friend. So we have to rebuild, because of the Brexit, we have to rebuild on new bases, financial, technical, legal bases. We have to rebuild this partnership. It will take many years. A free trade agreement, a strategic partnership for defense and security, and many other issues. We need to begin as soon as possible in the common interest these new negotiations. But the prerequisite is for the UK to approve and to ratify this treaty.
Could we get the microphone down here? Could I get you to respond, Minister? I mean, obviously, Michel Barnier represents the European Commission. Yeah. Would the European Council of Leaders contemplate not having a negotiation which might lead us to no deal?
Well, I partly answer this question. It would have to be about new elements on the substance. But this is not what is happening, because these candidates are promising to renegotiate the deal and to get a deal which will be better for the UK, which automatically implies it would be less beneficial for the European Union. So if you come to Brussels and say, let's renegotiate it and let's make it more advantageous to us and less advantageous to you, what answer does this person can expect?
Mr. Barnier, you said you didn't want to comment on the leadership contest in London, but Samuel Stolten asks us, does Mr. Barnier support his EPP political ally Manfred Weber in his bid to become the next Commission President, and how important is it that the next President is a Spitzenkandidaten?
If I'm not wrong, this question is not linked to the Brexit. Huh?
No. I think it's one of the other elephants in the room.
Let me be clear, my answer is yes.
Yes. Okay. Let's have a question from down here. I did promise we... Yes, please.
Thank you very much, Minister. Bonjour, Monsieur Barnier. I am a PhD candidate at the University of Kent in Canterbury in England. My name is Zach Pakin. If I could just play devil's advocate to both of you. I'm sure that many leadership candidates right now in the UK for the Tory leadership will be saying, I never would have agreed to the backstop. That was a mistake made by Theresa May, and if I were at the table, if I were Prime Minister, I wouldn't have done that. So we're effectively seeing the formation now of a new government. So could you please explain the EU 27's position that the withdrawal agreement cannot be reopened, seeing as we're theoretically dealing with someone who said that they never would have done this in the first place? Is this because the EU simply wants to move on at this point and has other more pressing issues and wants the matter closed, or is there another explanation?
But the problem is still there. And if I have any one of the candidates in this race, I will ask him, what is your solution to solve the problem created by the Brexit? You want to deliver the Brexit, okay. Tell me what is your solution, operational solution to protect the peace in Ireland, in the same time to protect your market, national market, from the EU export, and for us to protect our single market from the goods and animals coming from the UK. Tell me what I just tried to do with my team on a very pragmatic way to find a solution to the problem created by the Brexit, nothing else. So the backstop is not there to be used. It's just there as an insurance until and unless we find another solution. It's possible, and I'm ready to work immediately after the signature or the ratification of the treaty on what we called the ERG group and some others, the alternative arrangements. It could be part of the solutions, but we are not sure. Nobody has been able to give me the proof that these alternative arrangements can work today or tomorrow. That's the reason why we need this backstop. But I'm not ready, and I don't want to use this backstop in any case. We need this backstop and an insurance.
Timothy Gartnash.
Timothy Gartnash, Oxford University. Like many of my compatriots, I believe the only good Brexit is no Brexit. Paradoxically, the result of the European elections is to increase the probability of a second referendum, because after a failed renegotiation, Tory hard Brexiteer Prime Minister will face the choice between general elections and second referendum. General election before Brexit would be suicidal for the Conservative Party. Therefore, the chances go up of a second referendum. My question to both speakers is this. Is there any thinking, or should there be more thinking, on the EU side, not about the withdrawal agreement, which should not be renegotiable, not about the political declaration, but about future strategic directions for the development of the EU with its new leadership from the autumn, which might also be helpful in a second referendum debate?
It will come. As soon as we have found a consensus on the names, then the next step is the strategic priorities for the next European Union, for the next European Commission. And yes, I wish to see a platform that will be easy to understand for our people, and that will be easy to get their support, and that can also influence the public debate in the UK. Yes, I hope we will not get lost in the bureaucratic language and in the lengthy documents that no one will be able to read and even less to comprehend.
I remember a very important declaration of Angela Merkel saying a few months ago, the future of Europe is much more important than the Brexit. And I agree with her. So we regret the Brexit. We are going to deliver the Brexit if the UK still wants to leave. And independently, we have to work on the new positive agenda, because the Brexit negotiation is a negative negotiation. And I, just as one of the engineer of this unity of the 27, as a chief negotiator, I hope that the unity we have built with the government, with the parliament, thanks to this new method of transparency and trust and dialogue, this unity of the 27 with strong and sincere will be used by the leaders for a positive agenda, not only on this negative agenda.
Come to a
for
question.
what? There is many issues we have to face. The first one is obviously for me the climate change, but also the technological war, the migrations, the defense and security matters. And let me just add about the Brexit and the consequences of Brexit that in many of these issues, we must find a way to work with the UK. We must find, in particular for defense and security matters, not only in the NATO framework. And we have worked with the President Juncker and President Tusk to increase the proximity between NATO and the EU, but also independently of the bilateral relations between Slovakia and UK, France and UK, we have to find a way to the new framework of cooperation between UK and the EU.
Can I just ask a question on that? With the
Yes.
Galileo project, the Galileo project, the satellite navigation,
Yes.
high-tech, intelligence connected to it, the UK was shut out, and they were quite bruised by that. Does
UK
that
the
UK was shut out of the project? They pulled away from the project because they didn't feel, as a third. Well, you didn't feel. I don't think.
The UK has decided to leave.
Yes, but as a third
Nobody else,
country,
no?
it was difficult for them to be involved. And I'm just wondering
No.
if that example causes concerns about how the two sides could work together
No, but
on sensitive things.
we are ready to find, as far as Galileo is concerned, a way to work for the UK and obviously for the UK to be a user, a daily user of the Galileo system, including the PRS, which is the most sophisticated security system. We are ready to have this kind of cooperation. But the UK has decided to leave. Ladies and gentlemen, leaving the EU, the UK has decided himself to leave 700 international agreements, all the agencies of the EU. It is its own decision, not our decision.
Yes, please.
My question builds directly on what you just said. My name is Tanja Latic. I work as a researcher in the European Parliament.
Yes.
And I wanted to ask you, what do you think would be the most realistic forum for the UK to stay plugged into European defence? Will it be rather acting as a bridge between the EU and NATO? Will the UK be happy with third-party treatment in CSDP, in PESCO, in the EDF? Or the third option would be, would it rather invest more into outer institutional multilateral fora like President Macron's initiative?
No, speaking in the framework of the GlobSec here in Bratislava, I can answer very precisely to these questions. First of all, nothing will change in the NATO framework. Nothing, because the UK leave. Nothing will change for the bilateral relations between member states of the EU and UK. We have already, outside of the Union, bilateral relations between UK and many member states. So what is at stake is the new relations between UK and the EU. Because the UK has decided to leave the Union and to leave the European Council and to leave the Council of Ministers of Foreign Affairs. So the UK has decided himself not to longer be around the table. So we have worked with Theresa May, and I can imagine that the new Prime Minister will support this line, on 5 different tools to build the new cooperation. A framework of cooperation for political cooperation, in particular in United Nations framework for sanction and policies and so on. Second one is about the cooperation with UK for the external operation of the EU, to the UK if he wants to do that, to be part of external operation of the EU. Number 3, administrative framework for the UK to be associated to the Agency of Defence. Number 4, the cooperation intergovernmental cooperation for the intelligence services, and number 5, all hybrid threats and cybersecurity. On these 5 issues, we have found clearly tools, concrete tools, to rebuild what I call a strategic partnership with the UK.
And I would add very briefly that the answer to your question, on top of what Michel already said, goes beyond Brexit and UK. And namely, there is an ongoing discussion among the European Union members about the participation of the third countries in European defense autonomy and PESCO in particular. And the discussion, and it's not about UK only, as you can imagine, and the discussion is still ongoing. So there are different views. We will see what the outcome of this discussion will be.
Mr. Lajcak, Mr. Barnier, I'm being told that you have to depart the stage because I know you're both very busy. I'm sorry we haven't got all the questions in, but thank you very much indeed for your time. We're going to hear from Seema Malhotra, Labour MP, member of the Brexit Committee, who's going to give us some of her responses. She's our British representative here. You just want to have one final word?
One point.
Yes, do.
Because you are working during these days about mainly the security and defense and issue in Europe and all the part of Europe working together. We spoke about the unity of the 27, and we have worked and will continue to working for this unity. When you look at for the future of Europe, what are the key point, the key sector where we can build this unity? I'm sure that the defense issue are one of them. So the reason why I support all the efforts and the new initiative, the structural cooperation, or for the first time, the European Fund of Investment in Defense. And once again, speaking about Brexit and UK, which remain a great country, we will have to find the way of cooperation with UK.
Mr. Barnier, Mr. Lajcak, thank you very much indeed. Would you show your appreciation, please, for the Minister and Mr. Barnier? Thank you both very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you so much. Goodbye.
Thank you. Seema Malhotra, would you like to come and take a seat? Let's get into some of that and get a reaction from you.
Great, thank you.
I just wonder what you think when you obviously reflect on Theresa May leaving the party today, that she's no longer the leader of the Conservative Party. Do you look back on her speech at Lancaster House and think it was the red lines that she set down right at the beginning that was part of the problem?
I think that's absolutely right, but it does go deeper than that. And it is extraordinary to think that we've reached a place where she had, I think, the bulk of the country and Parliament behind what she was doing, and to have ended up in a position where she's being pushed out of office, and we have a country that is even more divided than when she came into office. There's a report that came out recently by the Institute for Government which has looked at the process that we've had over the last 3 years. And one of the conclusions from that, looking at both what's been positive and successful about the EU negotiations with the UK in terms of process, but also where we've succeeded, it's also highlighted some of the challenges. Now, one of the lessons has been that where the UK has been very specific about negotiating objectives, that it's been a smooth journey. One of the other key findings, which will remain an issue, is that the Prime Minister engaged Parliament far too late. She alienated our regional administrations, and she didn't take on and engage external expertise. And in my view, that also means the country. I think one of the key things we have to do in the period we have going forward is to engage the country back into this process. We won't break a logjam by just having a second referendum without shifting some of the debate, and that's got to be a priority for the new Prime Minister.
Timothy Garton-Ash said that when you rule out the impossibilities, and probably a general election is an impossibility at the moment, in mind of what happened in the Peterborough by-election last night, neither Labour nor the Conservatives would be very keen, then you come to the improbables and they become more likely. But I'm still struggling to understand how the British Parliament gets to a second referendum, because there's no majority for it.
I think Timothy's absolutely right, and I do think that we need to have a confirmatory ballot. that will, in my view, deal with what I think was the democratic deficit of the first referendum, in the question about whether people had the information, whether they had the knowledge and understood the implications. And we've got to get to a point, I've had this view for a long time, we've got to get to a point whereby there is some sort of consensus in Parliament about how we move forward, both on the withdrawal agreement and on the political declaration. Let me just lay out some of the complexities here. When it comes to the backstop, the issue with the backstop is not an issue with everybody. I actually support the backstop. I think that our obligations and our responsibilities in relation to Ireland, and particularly making sure there is no border, is a duty that we have. And I don't understand why this continues to be something that we can't have a much more open and honest conversation about. The tail is wagging the dog on this.
So why have you not backed the deal then?
Well, the issue that has been there, which has also been on the political declaration, and Monsieur Barnier talked about that. In my view, it was too weak in terms of not having clarity about where we were going to. And I don't think anybody would want to leave their home that they live in on the promise of a new home that they've never seen. This has been the issue in terms of what guarantees and can we have about where we're moving to, and making sure that that is a much tighter definition before we leave the European Union.
But some would say the bigger danger is no deal, and that's where we're heading to in October. You just heard from two men who say we're not really in the mood for a renegotiation, we're not really in the mood to extend. If that is the best way to get out of the European Union and uphold the referendum, then isn't it better to go down that way and then fight the election on the future political declaration?
Well, I do think that we have to have a proper process now that engages the country, and that for me means either some sort of citizens' assembly or convention as well. We won't solve this by just having another referendum. We've got to shift the conversation, because the debate about Brexit and where we are now is not just an economic question. In a sense, the economy has been trumped by other issues, for want of a better phrase, and there are now deep questions, cultural questions now, social division, cultural division, and the political division is a consequence of those things. We have to bring the country back together in a much more meaningful debate. We haven't done that, and that's got to be prior to us, in my view, having a second referendum. The second referendum has to be on something, and it isn't clear what the question's going to be. In my view, it's got to be on a deal that as agreed by Parliament, and it's got to be, and that has two parts, it's the withdrawal agreement and the political declaration. And some of the concern that you heard recently in the British Parliament was the attempt to decouple that, because that's even less security about where you're moving to. But this has got to happen, because otherwise we may get through a small political crisis, but we won't heal the country, and the country needs time in order to do that.
We're very pressed for time, but I want to get some questions from our audience. Does anybody have a question for Seema? Yes, please. Briefly.
Thank you very much. Olivier de France, I work for Iris in Paris. I mean, there's a real risk here that between the two parties we're going to create substantial bad blood, and that, obviously, as Michel Barnier said, we need to have a partnership in coming years and decades, and we don't want to create political acrimony to the point where we can't actually have any discussion on either side on any issue. I mean, if we take a tiny step back, is there any gesture of goodwill that either side could make now, I don't know, politically, at high level, something or other that could minimize that risk and basically just try to make sure that both that we can basically try to get out of this through the high road and not the low road?
I think we've got to be very clear that the UK Parliament has voted against no deal, and we currently have a Tory leadership election where that is back on the table. I think we've got to reassert that we want no deal. We want to avoid no deal. I think we do have to be clear that there needs to be time for the UK to have a wider conversation about where we go and the future of relationship. And I do think we've got to be clear about what a second referendum would do. In my view, it's got to be a confirmatory ballot on a deal that goes through Parliament, and that has to be against a Remain and reform. And there has to be I think, more extension back from the EU in terms of the conversation about where there could be reform. And I do think where we heard Foreign Minister Lajcak just make a few comments, and also Michel Barnier, I think that's critical, because we cannot have a situation where we go back. We cannot just roll back the clock and pretend this never happened, because there won't be the political and social acceptability of that. If we are to move forward, and in my view, as somebody who voted Remain, who would want to see us having a strong relationship with the European Union if we do come to leave, but would want to see us have a confirmatory ballot and would advocate a Remain and reform, we've got to be clear about what that reform would be to address the causes of Brexit, because we're in danger of missing this. If we don't go back to why people voted to leave in the first place, which wasn't for one reason, we've got a danger of there being a Brexit that we deliver, but does that solve the problems that people faced? And if it's going to make things get worse on the domestic front, Britain's going to have an even more complex political picture in the future.
And very interesting that last night in Peterborough, the vote seemed to be on local issues rather than Brexit in a Brexit constituency. So that is interesting. Seema, we're out of time. I'm so sorry. We've been very tight for time. But please, ladies and gentlemen, would you show your appreciation for Seema Malhotra? Thank you, Seema. We are going to go straight into the last session of the day. Steve Forbes is going to talk to us about what is ahead for the US and global economy. And so it just is left to me to thank you all for all your questions and to introduce the moderator, Ambassador Rastislav Kacha. Thank you, Seema. Please sit down.
We'll give it a little time until they reassemble, etc. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We will still take a couple of seconds, maybe a minute, until those who want to leave out will leave. And for those who still want to come in, so they come in. For those who watch on stream or on TVs, hello to you as well. I know this is a last session, the last debate. You're tired, and we still got a dinner, gala dinner, and more speeches tonight. All right, so let me sit down and let me warmly welcome in our last afternoon debate a person who, to me, it's a special pleasure and a special honor to introduce. This is no introduction is needed for somebody like him. But this is a little personal thing, and let me remind you, Mr. Forbes, we met for the first time in 2003, in early spring 2003, when you were coming here to look how the flat tax reform in Slovakia is working, and it worked. And we were dining together at the terrace at the residence of US Ambassador. You were gone, and you published a fantastic article which was called the Tatra Tiger. And it changed the fate of the country. If I was the president of Slovakia at the time, you would get the highest decoration, because that was the type of publicity you could not buy, and it helped Slovakia tremendously. But should I say deservingly so, because the flat tax really worked, and it proved your theories in practical life with deliverables. But ladies and gentlemen, we have a special speaker today because we try to put here two bubbles to overlap, you know, those who are active entrepreneurs, those who are in business, people who are in politics and executive branch, and people who are the thinkers. Well, you are the rare species who fit in every of those bubbles. So you're perfect overlap, you are perfect intellectually, your articles are extremely inspirational. Your last movie done on money, I would recommend everybody to watch. It's very illuminating. But also you run in politics, and you are a practical businessman, which knows how to run the business. So I'm turning floor to debate on the future challenges for the US, global economy to one of the most competent people who we could dream to have at GlobSec. Mr. Forbes, floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Mr. Ambassador, and I'm glad you're wearing the necktie that I gave you. Shows your discerning taste and your perspicacity. But in terms of the U.S., we're at something of a crossroads. The U.S. economy has done very well in the last 2 years, thanks to tax cuts and deregulation. Especially the deregulatory part. The 10 previous years saw, for example, literally tens of thousands of new regulations put on manufacturers in the U.S. Not to bore you at the end of the day with numbers, but a typical manufacturer in the U.S. would be paying per employee, per worker, about in taxes, something around $5,000 a year, U.S. The cost of regulations was $20,000 to $35,000 a year. So it's no wonder manufacturing was limping. So the pullback of some of the more onerous rules has had a real boost for the economy. The big cloud over the U.S. economy is trade. Tariff is another word for sales tax, excise tax, whatever you want to call it. It is a tax. And while there are very serious trade abuses, I believe there are other ways to deal with those abuses than applying sales taxes on imports and exports. That hurts everyone. And while, for example, China may be hurt more than the U.S. is going to be hurt. Just the sheer uncertainty about what the rules of the game are is already inhibiting investment by larger companies. And then you have the overhang as well of the possibility of auto tariffs, which would devastate this part of the world. Most Americans are ignorant of the fact that Slovakia is now the 5th largest exporter of cars to the United States. What you have done in the last 20 years has been absolutely remarkable. Small country, 5 million people, this muscular auto manufacturer. So that's the overhang. And if these trade disputes got resolved in the next few months, you would see the U.S. economy boom enormously. So that's one challenge. I think we need to modernize the WTO in terms of enforcement. We did that back in the 1990s when we replaced GATT, General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, which was done after World War II, with an up-to-date version with the World Trade Organization. Perhaps in the digital age we need to modernize and get around some of the ways countries get around the enforcement of these trade rules. The other thing, though, that overhangs is the subject you mentioned, Mr. Ambassador, and that is the subject of money. We need stable currencies to maximize domestic growth and global growth. And there are various ways to do it. Years ago, we had something called the Bretton Woods system, but the instability of currencies is like having a clock that changes the number of minutes in an hour each day. Imagine if we floated the clock like we float currencies. So you have 60 minutes in an hour one day, 30 minutes the next, 80 minutes the day after. We know instinctively life would be much more difficult. The same is true when you have this currency instability. So that's something that has to be addressed, and I think it will be in the next few years. So trade and money, those are the big things. And let me just say, there's no reason why the euro should be in trouble. I'll be blunt, since it's the end of the day, and you're eager to get away instead of coming at me. The European Central Bank and Germany, I'll be blunt about it, I don't think has done a very good job in managing the euro. There's no reason why the euro shouldn't be a robust currency. Even if particular countries get in trouble, it doesn't mean the euro's in trouble. In my country, the worst managed state, well, let me put it this way. If you take the word Greece and translate it to English in the U.S., it would come up Illinois. The state of Illinois in the U.S. is the worst managed financially state in the Union. But no one in the U.S. talks about Illinois leaving the dollar zone and adopting a drachma or a peso. We know it's a credit problem. Greece and others, those are structural problems. Those are credit problems. That's not a currency problem. So there's no reason why the euro couldn't survive and do very well. Some countries around the world use the dollar as a currency. They just do it. And so trade and money are the two things that are worrisome. And in terms of the European Union itself, I was hoping that if Britain had stayed in, it would have led a reform movement, I think, in terms of reforming the European Union. And I think would have attracted support from, obviously, the Baltic states, from much of Central and Eastern Europe. The Spanish government at the time, I think, would have been on board. I think the Dutch would have been on board. You could have reformed the thing, especially the overkill in regulations, instead of just trying to walk away, which is turning out to be harder than a divorce. If, not to make light of it, but if the consequences weren't so serious, this would be a grand comedy. I mean, I've never seen such incompetence at so many levels. But anyway, I do think that there will be reform in the European Union. I think this part of the world is demonstrating that there is a lot of dynamism, entrepreneurial dynamism, that you don't see in much of Western Europe. And if you create the conditions for that to really flourish, I think you're going to see the East move the West in terms of economic models. So I'm an optimist, but in the meantime, trade, got to get over this idea about trade deficits being bad. And on the money side, realize stability begets more prosperity.
Thank you very much for this kickoff. I would have about 1 zillion questions immediately coming out of this. Let me pick on some of those to start with. You've been advocate of very free trade, and you advocate, and I would really recommend to read the last article which was published on 31st of May, where you say the capitalism will save us if we will let it, and you advocate for classical tools of capitalism, including low regulations or sensible regulations, because some regulations are needed.
Yes.
I want to come maybe to that point of truly free trade as the first one, and second to the regulation. Where I want to get with the free trade. We see with President Trump kind of a new move towards curbing more of free trade. The taxes you mentioned, or the levies imposed on some of the things. And let us get to that specifically, the car industry, which would badly hit Slovakia. Because I lived 5 years in the United States. I was thinking, in 70s, if I was buying a car, I would love to have Mustang. That was an iconic American car, or Cobra, or Shelby, or things like this.
Right.
You would say, wow, that's sexy. And I'm thinking today, what would be that sexy American car I'd like to buy? Because Trump says, well, it's too many European cars sold. Truth is that today they are better, and more people will think, I'm going to get nice BMW. Let's make a pitch as
well,
partner.
The thing about, take the auto industry, yes, companies are located in different countries. But what's amazing is how global their supply chains are. You mentioned BMW. BMW has a major facility, enormous facility in South Carolina. And before the trade uncertainties rose up, they're planning to produce 300,000 vehicles a year. 200,000 for sale in the US, 100,000 for export. So, and one of the reasons why there's a very real concern about this proposed Mexican tariff is that with the supply chains, particular parts like car seats for babies, pieces move across the border several times before they're finally assembled, improved at each stage of the process. So when you get this kind of complicated supply chain, tariffs are extremely disruptive.
We're killing.
And again, with Mexico in terms of the humanitarian crisis, which emanates from Central America. It's not Mexicans who are trying to cross the border, it's Central Americans from Guatemala and Honduras and elsewhere. there are other ways to try to deal with it than punishing our own economy and our own auto industry. So in terms of a car, you could say, oh, I love BMWs, but it could be made in South Carolina.
And they are done.
And so there was once a joke, this will really date me, but back in the days of televisions, old televisions, the joke was we had a company called Zenith, which made TVs in the US. Company's not around anymore, but the observation was you could buy a Zenith TV, an American company that was put together in Taiwan, or a Sony TV, Japanese company that was assembled in California. That's how integrated the global system is. So, it's nice to support your economy, but economies thrive when they have access to the whole world for supply chains, for consumer markets. Adam Smith, gosh, it's horrible to think. He wrote 240 years ago.
Yeah.
We still haven't learned that trade is not zero sum.
Yeah.
Each gets something from the transaction.
Yeah, the invisible hand. Sure, and here where I was hinting is still the competition leads in edge, when you lead the edge in inventions. And until quite recently, what we call the West, what roughly would cover the area of holding North American space and European space, and that would be today roughly about 1 billion people. In terms what is put at as of the part of the cake of the world GDP, almost 50% of the world GDP. And until quite recently, that space would cover a lot of all of the modern inventions, which would drive the competitiveness and industrial future. This is slowly changing, and we see US little bit, closing down, a little bit trying to defend it, kind of closing it in its walls. Europe, in the face of little erosion, fragmentation, but slowly China competing. Not only competing what they used to compete on low wages and being efficient on manufacturing, but having the edge today in modern technologies. So how is this challenge? Where we are?
One of the things about, the nice thing about technology and innovation is that you can always renew yourself. I'm old enough to remember in the 70s when it looked like the U.S. couldn't do anything anymore. We had a terrible decade economically, but look what was emerging. Apple and Microsoft and other companies, FedEx, all were rising up in the 70s, these babies that became the giants of today, or the late 90s with Google, which was once a number. Now they're taking over the world. And what I think right now the focus is on in the U.S. what we call the FANGs, Facebook and others. What is, I think, while we focus on the giants of today, what George Gilder, who wrote an interesting book called Life After Google, which became, by the way, a bestseller in China, became the #2 book in China. But he makes the point, and others make the point, that the blockchain technology, which we all associate with cryptocurrencies, actually is providing the technology where, once again, we're going to decentralize technology.
Yep.
Right now, it's being centralized in these server farms and the cloud and artificial intelligence, all that kind of thing. It's going to blow up again.
It is.
Just as the PC blew up the mainframe and the centralized systems we had before. And that's why I think the focus on the innovation is stuff we're barely seeing now, coming out of a blockchain technology that is actually going to, if the promise is fulfilled, is going to give individuals, once again, control over their own data.
Yes.
You will be able to sell your own data. You won't get much for it, but you will be in control of it. And that is something that's poses enormous opportunities. And the other area where you're going to see major change is in healthcare. In the U.S., there's beginning to be a real consumer market in healthcare because of high deductibles, and you're starting to see rise up companies, little companies, devices that you can wear on your wrist that monitor things that you never even knew you had before. You don't have to go to a hospital anymore. You can get all done on your wrist or other things. And even in the area of cancer, immunotherapies hold a lot of promise. So I don't worry about losing a technological lead. I just worry about creating an environment where these technologies can be fully developed. And if China comes up, if entrepreneurs in China come up with them, good. They came up with a cure for certain kinds of cancer, I wouldn't begrudge them that. I'd be delighted. I want to get my hands on it. And so we got to get over this thing. We have to just always keep in mind, countries don't trade with each other. Individuals trade with each other. Organizations, companies trade with each other. And we put labels on them, UK, EU, China, US, but it's individuals.
But this is going to be even harder. You precisely lead to my question, which I want to have as my last, and then I turn to audience, because I don't want to occupy you for all of the time that we have. The world is becoming truly a global place here, because the technological change is going there. And truly, the amazing things of technology are coming like mushrooms and very fast. There's sometimes politics got even problems to catch up and to understand. And that's been here for us for a while, because it's hard to put label national. That's all. Krupp's German, it's gone. Even I'm thinking whether Apple I can attribute anymore to the United States in the way as we used to think in these national terms. But these new technologies and this globalization, which is a reality, that's not a Bilderberg or trilateral commission plan. It's just happening because technology is getting us there. It's creating a couple of challenges. One of because new regulation, new taxation, there are areas which is producing wealth and money, but they are out of traditional radar. How you would harvest and where you attribute this money and how you recycle them back what used to be a traditional national focus. That's one of the things. But another one, it's creating in the back loop kind of a political push, because it feels like it's a merry-go-round going at a high speed, and then people like President Trump, but not only him, Viktor Orban in Hungary, or some others say, oh, but we do not make decisions on this. Somebody else is making decisions are made somewhere else. It feels like you are under pressure and you want to get that wheel back, which ran away from you, which is quite impossible.
Well, technology always moves ahead of politics. Back in the late 1800s, when you had the rise of large industrial companies, led to the antitrust movement in the United States. People feeling that things were out of control. And it manifests itself in various ways. But what we have to keep in mind is if you don't have barriers, entrepreneurs come up with ways to disrupt those who look very mighty today.
Yes.
I'm old enough to remember when General Motors was the big monster company, and it was considered maybe busted up, take out Chevrolet. Well, who would have thought that a couple of decades later, GM would be filing for bankruptcy? IBM was a big monster. It nearly went broke in the early 1990s. Microsoft was seen as taking over the world. And now it's doing very well, but nobody fears it the way it had been done before. So in terms of the large companies that like Google and Apple and Amazon that worry the Europeans, the EU, and a lot of Washington, free markets are going to do it, going to tame them in ways that we can't even imagine today. Take the taxi industry, for crying out loud. A cartel in every city, then Uber and Lyft comes along, technology, and blows it away. And they keep fighting and reacting, but entrepreneurs, people trying to do things, and this is what's great hope for Slovakia. You've got a lot of people here who want to do that kind of thing. You just have to have the right environment. So don't worry about it.
Here we hit the right point, because the question that some debate earlier with you was, somebody raised in the audience and said, well, what do you use? Do you use Google account? Okay, who uses an iCloud account? Who is using some kind of a European type of the account of these types of the services, related? And then, of course, question comes that why most of those type of inventions we are talking about are born somewhere else but not here.
Well, and that's a very relevant question. Why aren't France and Germany high-tech powerhouses? They have all the ingredients to do it. And I'd argue it's structural problems internally. And you don't have that legacy in this part of the world that they've built up. It's, you take the state of Israel. Why does Israel, with 8 million people, have more high-tech companies listed on NASDAQ in New York than Europe? Why are they, after the US, they're the most productive country in the world in terms of high-tech.
10 million nation, yeah.
And so Skype came out of Estonia. You've come up with some good breakthroughs here in cybersecurity. So it's not size; it's just releasing the brain power and making sure the structure. And it's sad that the EU focuses on trying to bat down these giants instead of trying to figure out how do we create conditions where we have giants grow up in Europe.
Yeah.
Instead of worrying about what comes out of the U.S.
Yeah, overregulation can sometimes kill things and many other. But we got 5 more minutes to go, and I want to turn to the audience. If I see some hands in for questions, please, sir, go
ahead. Jonathan Isle from the Royal United Services Institute in London. I heard your speech and I heard this sort of intoxicating enthusiasm for globalization. But as you are very much aware, in a lot of European countries, the mood is in exactly the opposite direction. The feeling of the losers, those who may have voted for Brexit for precisely that reason. And the feeling of governments that perhaps state choosing so-called winners is actually the way to go. That the Huawei story of China is a story of a government-backed operation that has succeeded in acquiring a technological advantage. So in what way can we reassert the point that you made, which I find persuasive, but clearly politicians no longer think they work?
Well, they always do work. If politicians could pick winners, they would not be in politics. They would be in venture capital. They can no more see the future than any of us. We don't know what the future is, which is why you get these innovations coming from the most unlikely sources. I'll be frivolous for a moment. There's a great character that little kids love. I have young grandchildren. Talk about the UK, Peppa Pig. Great success. It was invented in the UK in 2004. No government could have invented that. Now that's a small thing, but the handheld. France, back in the 60s, Honeywell Bull thought, by golly, if we concentrate all computing power in one center, we could have servers and all of that. And high tech just blew by it. And so even though the model may have had some merit, they don't know the future. That's why socialism doesn't work. You don't know what the future is. Yeah. And when innovations come along, of course, there are always going to be side effects. The automobile, for crying out loud, kills tens of thousands of people a year. But we try to deal with the side effects and make sure we get the good of it. And what I think has happened in Europe and the U.S. is, I mentioned regulation. You had a situation where parts of the U.S. were doing very well, especially on the coasts, California, parts of the East Coast, but much of the country was lagging very seriously. You remove those barriers, and suddenly what looked like to be dead areas start to come to life again. And there's a lot of innovation there. We have one of the things we passed in our tax law a year and a half ago is called opportunity zones, where you remove barriers for people who invest in depressed communities. This is not to encourage gentrification, but actually pumping capital in. It's starting to show some, now they got the regs out of the way, starting to show some real life. So what you want to do is not try to pick winners. You can't. What you want to do is have the environment where winners emerge, and then when they get big, you can shake your fist at them, but you've got something that really enhances the standard of living. And I would argue that it was barriers that stood in the way that kept certain parts of the UK feeling that they were behind. And in the US, we had an environment where venture capital went all for bits instead of more tangible things. I think that's beginning to change now, but it was very skewed. Peter Thiel talks about how the whole flow of venture capital in Silicon Valley and elsewhere was very skewed, where being able to math whiz, being able to do algorithms, you could become a multi-millionaire, billionaire. But if you try to come up with new ways of manufacturing, forget about it. But we have a conference each year, 2 of them now, on high-tech and agriculture. Whoever would have thought agriculture would be a font of high technology? Well, it's turning out to be.
Yeah, yeah.
Legacy industries can revive in ways that people couldn't have imagined.
Well, thank you very much.
Trust people who have genius, but no standardized test is going to discover it. Have an environment where they can emerge.
Thank you very much for this Darwinistic optimism of the evolution. Truth is that I think Jonathan is hinting rightfully, if the gap opens between these natural Darwinistic pressures where the market is
But you know, one thing to keep in mind is when a society does well, it doesn't mean you don't have safety nets.
Yes.
It does, in fact, as a matter of fact, you can have more effective safety nets when you're creating wealth. And you won't have to use them as much because you're doing well. But remember, I hate to bring up the example, but the first welfare state in Europe came out of Germany in the 1880s, done for not the most noble reasons, Bismarck trying to dish the socialists. But Germany then, by the standards of the time, was a very wealthy nation, new nation, very wealthy. But that didn't prevent it from having a welfare state, or Britain in the early 1900s with Lloyd George and his junior partner Winston Churchill put in a lot of elaborate social insurance schemes, even though Britain had an empire and was the mightiest, one of the mighty industrial nation in the world, except for the U.S. and Germany. So it doesn't, when you say Darwin, you think of crushing things. No. Properly done, free markets allows a flourishing where even those who may get in trouble are not going to be thrown out on the sidewalk or the ditch.
Well, hopefully we will be able to handle all of those turbulences and gap opening here, because substantial changes in the history, when we look at that, when truly these were giant leaps, and we are there at this moment, you know, the technological leap and globalization, it's a major thing, probably unparalleled in human history.
Well, maybe we should change. You know, when you say artificial intelligence, it sounds rather monstrous and ominous. But a friend of mine who's a technologist said, we don't call airplanes artificial birds. We don't call automobiles artificial horses. These can be our friends. We control them.
Truth is that if this is handled properly, I think humanity will progress to another unseen level. But again, history also proved in the critical times, sometimes we did a lot of mistakes.
We did.
The New Balance came in between.
And the classic tragic one, the biggest mistake made by mankind, and I say man because it was men who did it in 1914 with the Great War. And it wasn't until the 1990s, that the proportion of global economy involved in international trade reached the levels it did that it was at in 1914. It took almost 3/4 of a century to get back proportionally what we had in terms of globalization, global economy, we had in 1914 before we blew it up and nearly lost civilization.
Well, this was an excellent debate, ladies and gentlemen. In my ear, I hear we have to stop it here and thank Mr. Forbes on my behalf and all of you for an excellent, exciting debate. And invite Nick Going, who will say a couple of remarks for the future. Okay, Nick Going is not coming, so I should say it. This is the end of the last afternoon debate. Those of you who's got invite for Gala Dinner and Transatlantic Awards, there will be another exciting speech by Timothy Garton-Nash. Get ready for that. And once again, out of my heart, very much appreciate that you join us here in GlobeSec. Thank you for doing together this Global Summit under 30, which was a very nice thing to do. And we all enjoyed discussing with you the future of economy and challenges for the global world.
Honor to be here. Thank you.